Whole Package works. Check out this review on Whole Package from Heart and Soil Supplements. I've been on the animal-based diet for the last 2 months. At the same time, I also ordered Heart and Soil Supplements Whole Package. I noticed an immediate difference on day 1 of taking the supplement. I've been taking testosterone gel prescribed by my physician for the last 18 months. There's a side effect to this medication. The testes shrink up and stop working. That was immediately reversed when I began taking Whole Package. 2 months later, I'm stronger at 52 than I was at 32. I'd previously been on a plant-based diet for the last 4 years with multiple problems, including pain all over my body from oxalate poisoning. That has gotten significantly better, as well as snoring, itchy skin, and I've lost most of my gut and I'm able to do activities I just didn't feel like doing for the last several years. Thanks, Dr. Saladino, for what you do, and thanks to Heart and Soil for all of the good supplements and the development of the animal-based diet. It has all been a game changer for me. You can find Whole Package, which has testicle from grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised cows in New Zealand, along with liver and blood, because blood is in your junk and it's all good stuff for nutrients to support sexual function in men and women, at heartandsoil.co. Our mission there is to help you reclaim your birthright to radical health. Heartandsoil.co. This is one of our most popular supplements for obvious reasons. Also want to let you guys know that the Kale is Bullshit shirt is available now at kaleisbullshit.shop. Where else would it be? We've also got a Seed Oils Are Bullshit shirt. We've got the Old School Stay Radical shirts, all kinds of good stuff there. We got hoodies. We got a hat. Check out the merch at kaleisbullshit.shop. I can't wait to see one of you, some of you, a gaggle of you in a Whole Foods wearing the shirt. You're going to start some conversations, and I think it's going to help a lot of people because who needs kale? It's bullshit. So check out the Kale is Bullshit merch, kaleisbullshit.shop. On today's podcast, I talk with John Abramson. He is a lecturer at Harvard. He is the author of 2 books, Overdosed America and Sickening. He was intimately involved and at the center of the Vioxx scandal, specifically in exposing the corruption from Merck. He is very well versed after 10 years in the litigation of pharmaceutical companies into all the tricks and chicanery that pharmaceutical companies use to abstract, confuse, to massage the data. This is stuff that I was not taught about in medical school, stuff that very few doctors are taught about, very few doctors even know about. This is a very important conversation. As we discuss in this podcast, I'm not saying that pharmaceutical companies are all evil. They are simply profit-driven, and we discuss some possibilities for the ways they could be regulated in the future that may lead to better outcomes for people, which is actually what should be the main outcome, the health of our humans rather than the pharmaceutical company profits. But I'm also for free markets. We talk about all that in the podcast and how to change medical education, how people can avoid falling prey to this, all kinds of things. This is a really, really important conversation. I hope it gets shared very widely, far and wide, because the more people that know about this, the more we can hopefully make positive changes in reforming our healthcare system, the way that physicians are trained, the knowledge of physicians, and the way that pharmaceutical companies operate. They have good products, some of them, but we know that they fall prey to many of the temptations that are present for all generating businesses, all money generating businesses. So you can email John. He gives his email in this podcast, and I think he's made a generous offer for people to reach out to him. But really enjoyed this one with John Abramson. On to the podcast. Hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, John Abramson, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Paul, thanks for having me.
You know, I really appreciate your work. You've written 2 books, Overdosed America and Sickening. We're going to talk about your work in both of these, but also your work involving Vioxx and some of these other drug litigation trials. One of the things that's been interesting for me recently, as I've sort of stepped away from the day-to-day practice of medicine and do more of this sort of thing, the podcasting and the education, is trying to help people understand the way that the pharmaceutical industry is really positioned within the medical sphere. And I think you are the person that's really done the best job of that. So I'm excited to have this conversation today. And I think it'll be very eye-opening for people. So why don't we start with a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into, I want to talk about Vioxx and Bextra and Neurontin, and then how it all got that way, and then how we fix it. So how did you get to this position?
Well, I was a family doc for 20 years, practiced in a small town an hour north of Boston. Before I went into practice, I did a 2-year Robert Wood Johnson Fellowship in research, epidemiology, and statistics. And I thought I was going into a career in academic medicine, except in teaching centers, family doctors don't get treated all that well. And I realized I just wanted to go out in the community and practice medicine. So I did. And I entered practice in 1982 and thought I would do that for the rest of my life. I love being a family doc and making house calls and knowing families and little kids and dying older folks and trying to make people's lives better. But as the 90s wore on, it was very clear to me, Paul, that the medical journals were becoming increasingly influenced by the drug companies. And things really started to heat up. There was an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association that showed that hormone replacement therapy significantly increased the risk of breast cancer in postmenopausal women. And yet the docs that I worked with couldn't be convinced that they should stop putting healthy postmenopausal women on hormone replacement therapy. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was Vioxx. The New England, it was an arthritis drug, an arthritis and pain drug, an anti-inflammatory drug like Motrin or Naprosyn. No more effective than those over-the-counter remedies for pain. Supposedly a better drug because it decreased the risk of serious GI complications. And an article was published in the New England Journal in November of 2000 that supported that claim, research by Merck. And 3 months later, the FDA had an advisory committee meeting, and there was a link on the web to the data that Merck had sent them. And at this point, I was getting pretty interested in what was going wrong. And I followed that link upstream into the FDA and found out that not only was Vioxx not a better drug, but it was a significantly worse drug, so that 1 out of 40 people who took Vioxx had a serious adverse event. Serious adverse event is like serious enough to put you in the hospital or worse. And that wasn't in the New England Journal article. The significant increase in the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots was not in the New England Journal Medicine article. And at that point, I realized that this thing had gone off the rails. Vioxx was the most heavily advertised drug on TV. My patients were coming in demanding it, not asking for it, demanding it. And I realized that we hardworking docs could no longer practice good medicine based on the information that we were getting and were supposed to trust. We had been taught to trust. And at that point, I left my practice to write Overdosed America. It was published in September of 2004. And I was just incredibly lucky that a week after my book came out in 2004, Vioxx was pulled from the market. So I was catapulted onto the media scene and on the Today Show and the morning shows and all sorts of shows and in the what's now called legacy media. Great coverage, and the lawyers saw me on TV speaking English, translating science into English for regular people, non-professionals, and started to ask me to be an expert in litigation. So I spent 10 years after that serving as an expert in litigation. And as an expert, you get access to the computers, to the corporate computers. Everything that everyone always says, I wish I really knew what was going on. The expert's job is to find out what's going on. And if you want data, you ask for data. And when I saw something wrong with the Vioxx data, I asked for the data, and it was wrong. So I spent 10 years in litigation and found a whole lot of things wrong, but it wasn't changing the way medicine was practicing. Docs were still being heavily influenced by the drug companies because they were publishing the articles in the journals, and they were sending their drug reps around with reprints, and they were hiring the prestigious docs to come out and tell the practicing docs that these drugs are great and you should prescribe them, showing the slides that Merck had prepared, not slides they had prepared. So after 10 years in litigation, which is it's a hardball sport. I mean, it's a blood sport. You got to be really ready to take on teams of lawyers in depositions and in the courtroom. And after 10 years, I had learned a whole lot about how the pharmaceutical industry works, but I had not had any impact whatsoever on how doctors think they should get the information they need to prescribe, to choose which drugs to prescribe for their patients. So at that point, again, I left what I was doing to write another book. It took me 6 years to write Sickening, and it was published last February.
It's such an interesting story. And I heard you on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I want to get into as much as you can talk about in this podcast. But one of the things that was so striking for me to hear was that as part of this role in litigation that you had, you got to really look into the vaults of these pharmaceutical companies, information that no one else gets access to in terms of their internal strategies, how they handle the data. And they, as part of that process, you had to sign non-disclosure agreements so that there's only certain things that you can tell us about what you saw, but you've seen with your own eyes something that very few physicians have seen. It's not the type of thing that I was taught about in medical school. I feel like there should have been a course in medical school, like pharmaceutical company corruption, how to be a good doctor that can sniff out pharmaceutical corruption. They had studies on they had courses on how to read studies, but we never got a study on how to get rid of a pharmaceutical rep in your office, or, the bullshit that the pharmaceutical reps are really trying to sell you. But let's just start with that. Like at a broad level, like what can you tell us about what you saw going on inside the workings of the pharmaceutical companies? Because you talk about it in Sickening, and it's like my high level appraisal was that it was just frank corruption of the data, like manipulation of the data, almost like a psyop. Like they're trying to make it look a certain way. It's like psychological warfare on doctors. Am I overstating that point?
You're not overstating it at all. There's a slide from the Neurontin trial that I talked about in chapter 2, where the drug company talks about how they're going to make sure that their marketing messages, which come from focus groups on how to sell drugs to doctors and patients, not anything about the science. It's what could we say about this drug that would sell the most drug? And then there's a slide that I've got in the book that shows that a marketing company showed consulting to Pfizer, showed that if they just let the articles get published and don't do anything to them, and then they put their marketing stuff together the way they want to put it together, there's going to be a discordance between what doctors are reading in the journals and the marketing stuff, and that's not good. So they solved this problem by showing in this slide that they've got to put their clinical trial data through a filter that assures that it will only let the approved marketing messages come through in what they publish in the medical journals. And then when you do that, then what's in the journals and their marketing messages are aligned. And that's the object of their marketing game. Now, that firm that consulted them and came up with this brilliant idea and this great slide was one of the members of the RICO enterprise that the jury found. The consultants didn't get named in the case, but they were part of the RICO enterprise that Pfizer engaged in selling Neurontin off-label. And Pfizer was found guilty in civil court, U.S. District Court, but it's civil, not criminal. But they were found guilty of fraud and racketeering charges.
Racketeering. That's like
racketeering charges.
That's like what the mob. Right. That's the mob. I had to look up that word. I thought, I don't even know what racketeering really means. Like it's the kind of thing you hear in like mob movies.
That's exactly right. The RICO law came to get control of the mob, to add the penalties to discourage that activity. And the drug companies are doing exactly that. In this case, Pfizer conspired with this medical consulting company to ensure that the messages that they got out to doctors showed that Neurontin was effective for treating neuropathic pain when they knew it didn't work, when the FDA had told them their data was so bad they wouldn't even allow them to file an application for broadening the indication. And when after that, they hired their own consultants to look at their data to figure out what they had to do to get this drug approved for neuropathic pain. And their own consultants said to them, and this is a direct quote, "You're done. You're done." And then they hired this medical communications company to help them write an article that would show it worked.
Oh my God.
They did. And it was published.
And then did Neurontin, so this was off-label indication for Neurontin for neuropathic pain. So the FDA approved Neurontin for something. What was the original indication?
It's a second-line drug for seizure disorder. And then it got approved for post-zoster herpes shingles, neuralgia. It got approved for that. And that's all.
And they were trying to then market it to people for neuropathic pain, either diabetic neuropathy or other neuropathies that were off-label.
Exactly. Their marketing people told them that's where the money is. You want to sell a lot of Neurontin, you got to sell it to people with pain. And now, even still, I mean, I would love it if people would read chapter 2 of my book and find out what really happened. But even now, Neurontin usually ranks, or generic Neurontin, gabapentin, usually ranks between the 6th and 10th most frequently prescribed drug in the United States, even now. And all that happened in the trial, all the fraud and all the chicanery about designing studies so people had so many side effects they knew they were on Neurontin, and all that stuff is public access information. People can get my report on the web. If they just Google my name and Neurontin report, they can get the report that I submitted to the court. And it's just, pure chicanery. Something like 90% of the drug sales, the economists on the plaintiff's side calculated 90% of the drug sales were the result of Pfizer's off-label, scientifically unsubstantiated marketing. And it still is.
It still is. And it continues to be in the top 10 drugs, like you said, that's prescribed.
Yeah.
And do you remember what the fine was? So Pfizer gets found guilty of racketeering and fraud. What was the fine?
So the fine in the trial I participated in was Kaiser Health Systems suing Pfizer.
Right.
And that was $47 million tripled to whatever that is, $141 million. But it got kind of interesting, and you can pull me out of the weeds if you want to. But the judge on the case, who is a great judge and really trying to do the right thing, had not allowed other lawsuits against other payers against Pfizer to go through to be tried in her court, because she said you can't prove that every doctor was influenced by Pfizer's marketing. And if you can't prove that every prescription was influenced by Pfizer's marketing, then one of the circuit appeals court had said you can't try the case. So rather than her allowing the whole case to go through, she just allowed Kaiser to go through, because they have a bottleneck through which their information gets to their docs. Now, after that case, Pfizer appealed the decision and lost. And after that case, the attorneys appealed Judge Sarris's decision not to allow the other cases to come through. And the plaintiff's attorneys won. And I believe the damages in the broader case were a little over $300,000. $300 million. But that's just a pittance of the money that Pfizer made on Neurontin.
Any estimates of the profits on? I mean, I could have looked that up before the podcast. We're talking, Neurontin must be a multi-billion-dollar profitable drug. We're talking, it's not even gross profits here.
Right. It went off patent in 2004. So the generic companies got into it, but the brand name companies made billions of dollars, and their fines didn't come close to compensating the public for the money that was misspent because of their misinformation. And really importantly, nobody went to jail.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, that's the bottom line of every one of these cases. In Vioxx, the company hid 3 heart attacks from the New England Journal, failed to present the significantly greater frequency of serious adverse events. The company did all that. There's no question about it. 40 to 60,000 Americans died from Vioxx. 40 to 60,000, like the number of Americans who died in the Vietnam War. Nobody went to jail.
How's it possible? I mean, Pfizer's found guilty of racketeering and fraud. Is it just that the blame is spread across so many people, or they can't point the finger, or are there legal loopholes that protect the people acting within Pfizer? And then we can talk about Merck for Vioxx in a moment. But you were involved in litigation. I know you're not the judge, but how can no one go to jail for that?
I think it's a representation. In the real world, it's a material representation of the power structure in our society. There's no way in a rational, if somebody walked into a corner store and stole a few $billions, they might go to jail. If they stole a cigarette, they'd go to jail. Or it could be worse if your skin's the wrong color. But in this case, we just pass on it. I was involved in a case. A drug like Vioxx was Bextra.
Mm-hmm.
It was a cousin of Vioxx. It was supposed to be gentler on the stomach and supposed to be good for pain. And the manufacturer, which happened to be Pfizer, marketed it in a way. Now, this one I can't talk about because it hasn't been unsealed. I can't give you the details, but I had participated in civil litigation. Not criminal litigation, but civil litigation. So the plaintiff's attorneys paid me to do my thing with the data, to figure out what they did with the data. And I thought I had figured it out. I still think that my analysis was correct. And not much was happening. And I blindly called the Department of Justice and the FBI and said, I know something about this drug, but I can't tell you because I'm constrained by a protective order. And they said, well, if we send you a subpoena, a federal subpoena, like the January 6th committee is sending federal subpoenas, if we send you a federal subpoena, then you will have to come to FBI headquarters with your computer and tell us what you know. And so I did that. The DOJ keeps their cards very close to their chest, but I did that. They were very smart. They asked me great questions. They had really done their homework. And that was the last I heard of it until 6 months later. I read in the newspaper that the Department of Justice and Pfizer had settled on a $1.195 billion fine, which was the largest fine ever in U.S. history for any matter. Nobody went to jail. And the FBI, I developed a good relationship with FBI guys. They were and women. And they were really working hard, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. So it's not like they don't know how to catch criminals, but nobody went to jail.
Okay. Oh, it's just crazy. It's just, and you can't talk about the details of that one, but is it safe to say that it involved something similar, some sort of manipulation of the data to make it look a certain way that could be potentially misleading to physicians? Is that an accurate statement?
I wouldn't deny that.
Okay. But you can't. Okay, I get it. Now, can we talk about Vioxx? Because I think let's talk about the details of the Vioxx case, because I think people may find this one interesting. If people are old enough to remember the case, they probably have heard of this, and there is some striking data, and we can do the numbers to say about 40 to 60,000 people probably died due to the side effects of Vioxx, which were these like clotting complications, right? Cardiovascular events, strokes, because of the way that Vioxx is working to spare the stomach lining. It also appears to make us a little more hypercoagulable, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's go through. Let's tell people in detail the Vioxx story, because you were so central to that one.
Well, the Vioxx story is that Merck developed this drug. And again, based on their marketing studies, they had a drug that they claimed would be gentler on the stomach. And they got it approved for arthritis and pain in 1999. The FDA didn't give them approval for being gentler on the stomach. They didn't allow that to be in the label. And Merck was undertaking, at the time Vioxx was approved, they were undertaking another study called the Vigor trial to prove that Vioxx was a better drug because it was safer, because it caused fewer serious GI complications. So the Vioxx was originally approved in May 1999, and this study was published in the New England Journal in November of 2000. And it said that Merck significantly reduced the risk of serious upper GI complications, And the numbers worked out to you had to treat 125 people with Vioxx to prevent one serious episode. And that's a good thing. What the New England Journal of Medicine article didn't say is that the risk of thrombotic cardiovascular complications, meaning, as you said, heart attacks, blood clots, and strokes together, not individually, together, was significantly greater in Vioxx than in naproxen, which was the comparator drug. And in fact, the risk of serious adverse events, you had to treat 125 people to prevent one serious GI complication, but you're going to cause a serious adverse event in every 40, out of every 40 people. So for every GI complication that you prevented, you're going to cause 3 other serious adverse events. And that wasn't in the article. And what came out in this article over years, the New England Journal finally told the truth about this article. They sold 900,000 reprints, almost all of which were after they knew that their article was wrong. They sold 900,000 reprints. They didn't fess up to the information that was missing from that article, even though it was available through the FDA 3 months after the article was published. The Vioxx sales went on for another 3 years or so, 4 years or so, and they didn't fess up to what wasn't in the article. And then in 2005, one of their editors was getting deposed, had been deposed in a trial, a Vioxx trial, and the New England Journal thought that his deposition was going to be played in U.S. District Court and the media would pick it up. So they had a sort of semi-correction to the article. And in that semi-correction to the article, it became very clear. The editors admitted it, that they hadn't seen the data from the trial. They had just seen the data that Merck had submitted in the manuscript. They hadn't seen the data, and the peer reviewers hadn't seen the data. And that's standard operating procedure. Now, I want to make this very clear. Still, when an article is published in as prestigious a journal as the New England Journal, all the way down, JAMA, Lancet, all the way down, the peer reviewers are supposed to look at this article and certify for practicing physicians that the article is an accurate and reasonably complete representation of the clinical trial data. They don't get the clinical trial data. Peer reviewers do not get the clinical trial data. And this is still going on. It's just shocking. So docs are taught to practice evidence-based medicine, which is based on peer-reviewed articles that are published in respected journals, and make sure that the structure of the study is okay from what you can see in the journal article. And docs are taught that that's the Bible. You can't question. I mean, that's evidence-based medicine. If you don't practice in accord with that, you're a schlock doctor. When in fact, the schlock is in the peer review and the editors. They don't know what the hell happened. They're taking the drug company's word for it because the drug company usually plays a major role in writing up these articles.
So just so people understand what you're saying, when an article is submitted to a journal, and there's different levels of prestige for these journals, with the New England Journal probably being the most prestigious or one of the most prestigious journals out there, the New England Journal of Medicine editors who are looking at this data are not actually looking at raw data from the trial. They're looking at something that has essentially been pre-digested and provided to them by a pharmaceutical company that paid for a trial. Is that right?
That's correct. And remember what we started talking about, that slide from the Neurontin trial, where you've got to put your clinical trial through a filter of the marketing messages before you publish it? This was that.
Okay. And just so people understand, with Vioxx, they left out data regarding adverse events, side effects. And together, you said these were strokes, embolic complications, and cardiovascular events like heart attacks that were more. So if you treated 100 people with Vioxx, more people would be harmed and have the adverse events like those, then people would have improvement in their GI complications.
That's correct. And I said it a little bit wrong before. It's worse than what I said. If you add in all the effects, the benefit in GI complications and all the negative effects, 1 out of 40 people who took Vioxx had a serious adverse event.
And you'd have to treat, you said 121 to prevent a bad event. So you're basically, it's
but that bad event is included in the 1 out of 40 number.
Okay,
it's washed out.
Yeah. So it's more harmful than it is beneficial. And there's been other examples of that. Yeah.
There's no question.
And then we know that because, and one of the things that I found striking in your book, and you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, was that because of the commercial push behind Vioxx, I did some content on my social media talking about Humira, which I think is the current drug that gets the most marketing dollars. I think it's $500 million a year is spent marketing Humira, monoclonal antibody for psoriasis and some of these autoimmune conditions, and psoriatic arthritis.
And arthritis was the first drug, first indication.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And $500 million go into marketing that drug. And I imagine, I think you said something like maybe 300 million went into some of these other drugs. I'm maybe making the numbers up, but I mean, these were hundreds of millions of dollars of advertising dollars. And you as a physician had patients coming into your office demanding that you prescribe that drug, which is the psychology here is crazy to me. And I've spoken about this, but we can just touch on the fact that the United States is one of only 2 countries in the world that allows direct to consumer marketing of pharmaceuticals. And then if you really think
let me just interject a fact. The other country that allows direct-to-consumer marketing of pharmaceuticals is New Zealand, but they have such an active and aggressive pharmaceutical program that they spend the least among developed countries on drugs, and we spend the most. So it's not just the advertising; it's what you let to go on, around the advertising that's really matters.
And then if people thought this is a free market, because I heard you talk about this, the fact that because these drugs, like they help some people, they're not regulated. They are protected under the First Amendment, right? And then the patients come into doctors' offices and they put doctors in a bad position. So this is crazy. I don't understand it.
Except the doctors don't think they're in such a bad position because the drug reps are coming in, bringing the article from the New England Journal that says it's a good drug. So the doctor thinks that he or she is practicing good medicine, and the patient thinks that he or she is getting good medicine. And the only problem is it's not good medicine.
Because the doctors don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes. And I worked as a physician assistant in cardiology before I went back to medical school. And it's hard. Somebody that's not a physician or a healthcare practitioner, when you're in an office setting with a patient and they're sitting across from you and they're saying, "Doctor, I really want to be prescribed this drug," it puts you in a hard position, because if you say, "I don't think that's the best drug for you," even if you were so savvy, which you may be misled in the first place because of all this, then the patient's going to be pissed.
Exactly. Not just pissed that you're not agreeing to their request or demand, but pissed because you're going to look like you're not up to date. Like they're more up to date than you are. And the drug companies know that. They know what they're playing with. When you see those drug ads on TV and they say, "Ask your doctor," it's like, your doctor's not going to stand up to this. Go talk to your doctor, because you're going to get the drug.
So is it just, like we said, is it just because is it because of lobbying? And you talk in Sickening about the amount of money spent by pharmaceutical companies on lobbying. The First Amendment, there must have been legal precedents that protect these pharmaceutical advertisements on television. Could we ever get rid of these? They're irrevocably protected by the First Amendment now?
I don't think we're going to get rid of them, but that doesn't mean that they can't do a public service. Because what we have now is this charade where the FDA says you have to list the side effects, and that's why it says you're going to die and your limbs are going to fall off and you'll never have sex again, kinds of things. The FDA says you got to say all those side effects. And that's supposed to balance the message so that viewers get a realistic message. They don't get a realistic message. A realistic message on Vioxx would have been 1 out of every 40 people who takes Vioxx has a serious complication. And if you told that, you're not going to sell, and it's no more effective than the older drugs, and it costs 10 times more, you're not going to sell many drugs. So the way it's set up now, the advertisements have to conform with the letter of the law, but the law doesn't say that we're going to do post-viewing testing on consumers and make sure that you've communicated the information that they need to make a rational decision about whether this drug would be helpful. That is not forbidden by the First Amendment. That is just that doesn't happen is a simple representation of the influence that the pharmaceutical pharmaceutical industry has over the FDA.
I recently did some content on a Chantix ad. You've probably seen it. It's on YouTube. It's an older gentleman sitting on a bench, and it's talking about smoking, and Chantix can help you quit smoking. And then it goes into the side effects, and it's just a chill music, and it's a gentleman sitting on a park bench with his wife, and they're talking about the side effects. And the side effects of Chantix, varenicline, this medication that treats smoking addiction are myriad, and
right.
Suicide, depression, all kinds of things, like really serious side effects. And in my mind, I'm thinking in the middle of this conversation, if that ad were really accurate, they would show, I don't think they have to show somebody committing suicide, but they would they have to show some sort of visual representation of somebody who's depressed or having worsening of their psychiatric illness, or
right.
How can you?
And the data, they would have to show the data. How many people have a psychiatric side effect that is minor, that is major, compared to how many people are helped to quit smoking? That's what the viewer needs to know, but they're not saying.
Right. I've often thought that I don't understand why cigarettes are forced to have warning labels, but this is a little bit off topic, but similar. Foods that we know are junk food and ultra processed don't have warning labels on them. Why doesn't a Snickers bar have a warning label that says, we know that consumption of ultra processed foods like this Snickers bar is consistently associated with worse health outcomes and every type of cancer known to man, or a Lay's package, why doesn't a Snickers bar have a picture of someone getting dialysis on the side of it saying, hey, if you eat too many Snickers bars, you probably are going to get diabetes and you're going to get dialysis, which means you have to be at a kidney center, or you're going to lose a toe or a foot. It's so interesting to me. And I think there are parallels between the ultra processed food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, probably in the way that they lobby Congress. But do we need stronger warning labels on packages? Like, do pharmacists need to say to patients when they get a drug, like, hey, this drug actually has some pretty bad side effects, and the risk of the bad side effects is this, and you may actually not. Then the physicians would feel like they're getting undermined by the pharmacists.
Well, in an ideal world, that information would be available to everybody, and it would have to be on the ads. If you marketed Vioxx and said 1 out of 40 people who takes this is not going to benefit, they're going to get seriously hurt, you're not going to sell much Vioxx. and then let me just add one thing to the Vioxx story, and you pull me out of the weeds if you think it's too much. But I participated in one of the last Vioxx trials. I think it was 2011. And in that study that I was talking about before, the Vigor study that was designed to show that Vioxx caused fewer GI complications, they rigged the patient population so that 55% of the people who were in that study were taking corticosteroids like prednisone for arthritis. Now, that's in a normal population, less than 3% of the people are taking corticosteroids in conjunction with anti-inflammatory medicines. But in this study, more than half were taking corticosteroids plus an anti-inflammatory drug. So I realized that Merck hadn't submitted data on the risk of serious GI complications in that study among the people who weren't taking prednisone at the same time, or a prednisone-like drug. And because we're in litigation, I could ask the lawyers to get the data from Merck on this, the raw data, in a form that a statistician could analyze. And there was a great statistician that I was working with. And we did that. We got the data. And we found that for people who were not taking steroids concurrently, Vioxx was no gentler on the stomach. It was all nonsense, except for the very small percentage of people who are taking Vioxx plus an over-the-counter anti-inflammatory drug. And nobody had figured that out. I mean, a whole lot of experts, including myself, had been involved in this for years, and nobody had figured it out until the very end. So we did that. And the statistician wrote it up in a hyper geeky statistical journal, and nobody knows that fact. I mean, my telling you right now is going to significantly increase the number of people who know that the study was designed for on a population that wasn't going to be like the population that the drug was going to be prescribed for.
Do you think this is still happening today? I mean, a lot of this was in the early 2000s. And have you heard about this drug that's been marketed for the last, I think, 4 or 5 years for Alzheimer's, that it changes beta amyloid in the brain, and it doesn't help at all. And I think that it's probably like Vioxx. I'd have to go look at the raw data, but it actually causes severe side effects and doesn't really help, because we know that the whole amyloid hypothesis with Alzheimer's is wrong, and that having an antibody that gets rid of amyloid beta in the brain is probably doing much more harm than it is good. But it's still approved by the FDA and it's still prescribed. Like, what is going on? It's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah, that's the postscript to my book. I mean, it's in Sickening. At the very end, I added that in the last minute, because for exactly the reason that you're bringing this up, it's still going on, and it's just craziness. The FDA advisory committee voted 10-0 with one abstention not to approve this drug, that it did more harm than good. These are the independent doctors that come in to evaluate. So they vote 10-0 with one abstention not to approve it. And the FDA approves it. 3 of the doctors quit who are on the advisory committee because they're so outraged. I know one of the guys. He's a really good guy. He's really smart. So the woman who's in charge of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at Pfizer, at the FDA, though probably at Pfizer, she had spent 16 years as an executive in the pharmaceutical industry. I don't know if she was at Pfizer. That was a slip. But the woman who oversaw this process had spent 16 years as an executive for pharma before she came to the FDA. So her comment on this just blunder that is so huge that you can't even make up an analogy for how stupid it was for the FDA to approve this drug. She said, and the FDA advisory committee votes 10-0 not to approve it. And her solution to avoiding this problem in the future is to allow conflicts of interest with drug companies amongst the FDA advisory committee members, because then, I'm not making this up, because then there won't be so many emotional reactions. And that's how she's going to fix the problem.
So conflicts of interest are okay.
They'd be good, because there wouldn't be discord in the advisory committee, because everyone would vote to approve the drug.
It's crazy. The amount of conflicts of interest in medicine at large are striking to me. My friend Andrew Huberman sent me something recently that I posted about for the 2020 to 2025 nutritional guidelines for the United States. And there was a paper published saying that 95%, 19 of the 20 people on the committee that made the 2020 to 2025 nutritional guidelines had ties to industry, pharma, food, agriculture, things like ILSI, the International Life Sciences Institute, which is widely regarded as kind of a lobbying agency for ultra-processed foods. And so 19 out of the 20 people had industry ties. And I did a social media post about that. And then if you look at, and we can talk about statins briefly, if you look at the 2003, 2004 AHA guidelines, right, to change the levels of LDL, I think it was 8 out of 10 people had ties to the statin industry. Let's talk about that one, because that's the statin one. I did a whole podcast on statins previously, but statins are really, they really grind my gears.
Right. Well, they should, because it's a perfect example of why American medicine is spending so much money and yet not getting as good results as the other wealthy countries. And the issue is that all the data and all the guidelines are designed to sell drugs. And so virtually all of the clinical trials that are done are funded by the drug companies. They do not make their data available. They make it available to an outfit in Oxford that puts all the data together, but they have their ties to the drug companies too. And here's the thing, that the research about how to prevent cardiovascular disease is dominated by statins, and now more expensive drugs are coming along. That's what our research is about. And that's what medical students learn about. And that's what doctors learn about. But they're learning about what drugs might benefit in the reduction of the risk of cardiovascular disease. They are not learning about what they think they're learning about. They think they're learning about how they can help their patients prevent heart disease. They're not learning about that. Nobody's ever done a study that compares healthy lifestyle modification to statins. That study's not been done. Why hasn't it been done? Because the people who would fund it, the drug companies, can only lose. They've got the whole thing in their pocket. There's no reason to gamble with losing their market.
But there's something kind of like that. And you talk about this in the book, the Diabetes Prevention Program trial.
Right.
You want to talk about that one?
Absolutely. This was published in the New England Journal to talk about something that the New England Journal did well. This was published in the New England Journal in 2002. And it was exactly that study. It was taking people at high risk for diabetes and making 3 arms, not 2. There's not just a drug arm and a placebo. They added a lifestyle arm. And this is a really important study because docs are taught subliminally that there's no sense in wasting time trying to help people to change their lifestyle because they won't do it. Don't waste your time. Just go ahead and treat them with whatever you're going to treat them with. Well, this study showed that the people who took metformin, the rightful first line drug to treat type 2 diabetes, developed 31% less diabetes than the people who took placebo. So that's a good thing. In my heart of hearts, this is not, this is now my opinion. Everything I've said so far is fact. This is my opinion. I think it's just artificially suppressing the blood sugar. I don't think it's undoing the process that's diabetes that's really responsible for the heart disease and the amputations and the kidney failure and all.
No.
Right. But in any event, 31% fewer people got diagnosed with diabetes when they were treated with metformin compared to the people who were treated with placebo. For the people in the lifestyle group, 58% fewer people developed diabetes than the people who were treated with placebo. And that's for real. And those people, even though the program lasted, I forget, 6 months or a year or something, those people kept their benefits over 10 years. They kept their weight loss. They continued to exercise. And it's just a pure demonstration of how the corporate America is determining what doctors are, the so-called knowledge, the quote knowledge that doctors are getting that causes them to think that they're practicing medicine the right way when they're being distracted from practicing medicine the right way.
It's crazy. I was not taught to think about lifestyle interventions in medical school. And I went to the University of Arizona. There's better medical schools, maybe at a better medical school, but I doubt it.
Better medical schools probably teach it less.
I don't.
They're more into the the reductionist science, and
that's my impression. I mean, I'm just trying to be I had my experience in PA school and my experience in medical school, but other doctors I've spoken to are the same way. My father's a physician. He went to Georgetown, decades before I went to medical school, and I guess I've known physicians who went to all sorts of medical schools. And consistently, I do not hear them learning about lifestyle interventions. And my father was an internist, and he even told me growing up, I remember him telling me, patients won't do it. Patients won't do the lifestyle changes. And I thought, oh, patients won't do the lifestyle changes. My dad's trying. And I think it's probably because we're not telling them the way to do it, or we don't have a system that's set up to give them the support that they need to make the lifestyle changes. But the Diabetes Prevention Program trial is so striking. The fact that you can give them one of the first line drugs that's very effective for diabetes, metformin, and find that lifestyle intervention is better. Why don't we have a trial, like you said, paid for by Pfizer or AstraZeneca or whatever statin manufacturer wants to manufacture their statin, which does Mediterranean diet, whatever diet you want, Mediterranean diet, because we have Diet Lyon study. I would prefer something a little different than a Mediterranean diet, but Mediterranean diet versus Lipitor, or atorvastatin, rosuvastatin versus control. That would be a cool trial.
Yeah. Or I want to go a step further. Why not in a medical condition that is clearly related to lifestyle? Nobody would deny that. Why not mandate that any study of a drug that is supposed to reduce the risk of heart disease has to have a lifestyle study, a lifestyle arm? It's no sense, because the doctors think and the patients think that these studies are determining the best way to prevent heart disease, and they're not. They don't have a lifestyle arm. So why does the FDA allow these trials to keep going on without a lifestyle arm. And that's because of the influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the FDA. I mean, the FDA is funded, the division of the FDA that addresses human products, 61% of its funding comes from the drug companies.
I just want to read from the Diabetes Prevention Program trial. And so it was 3,234 non-diabetic persons. They had elevated fasting and post-load plasma glucose concentrations, and they were randomized to placebo, metformin, and it was 850 milligrams twice daily, or a lifestyle modification program. And this is what I wanted to highlight. And the goals of the lifestyle modification program were at least a 7% weight loss and 150 minutes of physical activity per week. So that was what they did. And you can read the trial if you want. It's easily available online, and you can see what else they did. But that was their goal, was 150 minutes of exercise per week. They wanted people to lose 7% weight loss. So they wanted people to lose weight and exercise. And I imagine there were some dietary recommendations, which were probably at the level of stop eating junk food and processed sugars. Probably, and that level of intervention was significantly more effective than metformin, which is striking. And I agree with you completely. I think every trial, which we know is in a lifestyle disease, and I think so many diseases are lifestyle related, even the ones we don't think of as lifestyle diseases,
including cancer, though.
Exactly.
You'd have to do a long-term study about prevention. That would take decades.
And dementia, cancer, certainly cardiovascular disease, certainly diabetes, certainly anything with obesity, hypertension. The list is long of conditions that are considered chronic and are often considered idiopathic, primary hypertension, that certainly have lifestyle connections. And I believe there should be a third arm that involves lifestyle. Now, I think that the question then becomes, how did it get so messed up? And let's talk about that as we wrap up the podcast. The most striking statistic that I saw in your book was, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, was that pharmaceuticals or something like the average lobbying spend was $450,000 per member of Congress by the pharmaceutical companies. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you are getting it right. And here's how it got wrong. We were doing fine through 1980. Americans had a lower death rate than the average of the comparable countries. We were spending a little bit more, maybe 2% more of GDP, approximately, than the other countries. So we're spending a little bit more, we're healthier, and things are going just fine. And then we get into this turn of America to this corporatism, where the function of corporations got explicitly defined as maximizing the profits that they return to shareholders. That became the primary function. And many of the economists on the right said that was their moral function. Their moral obligation was to maximize their profits. And that is exactly what they're doing. And they do it damn well. They're maximizing the amount of money that gets returned to their shareholders. They're taking it out of not just the pocketbooks of working Americans, but the health of working Americans, because their primary obligation is not to be efficient. In fact, it's to be inefficient and raise the profits that you extract from Americans. And it has nothing to do with making people healthier. So they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And as that really became, it seeped into the DNA of our society, the medical research got completely taken over by pharma. So this is how quickly it changed. In 1991, 80% of clinical trials were paid for by, most of them paid for by the drug companies, but they were done by academic medical centers. The academic medical centers designed them, analyzed them, wrote them up. 80% in 1991 were done in academic medical centers. By 2004, that 80% had gone down to 26%. So the research was just pulled out of the academic medical centers. At that point, the academic medical centers, according to a deputy editor from JAMA, they were sinking to the ethical bottom because the medical centers had to compete with the contract research organizations, the for-profit corporations that the pharmaceutical industry is paying to do their research, which they can control. Well, the academic medical centers had to let them control the research that even the academics were doing. So that of the 20, amongst the 26% that was still in the academic medical centers, 50% of those research contracts said that the drug companies had the right to write up the studies, and the so-called authors of the studies could suggest revisions. That was the extent of their power, to suggest revisions. And this is in the academic medical centers.
Okay. And then let's just highlight for people, what percentage of medical trials are paid for by pharmaceutical companies?
86%. And another fact that is equally mind-blowing is that 96% of the medical research that's done in the United States is done about drugs and devices.
96%.
96%, right.
And
the other 4% is devoted to prevention and health system improvement.
Right. 4% for an intervention that in the diabetes prevention program was better than the first line drug.
Twice as good. That's
twice as good. But 4%. Okay. And then let's just throw this one in there so that people really drive the message home. You may know the statistic. If not, well, I think what percentage, what about pharmaceutical advertising on TV? Like, I don't know, maybe you don't know the statistic, but I've heard people talk about it. Like, what percentage of commercials and like news network funding comes from pharmaceutical companies? It's a large amount, right?
It's a large amount. And I never saw this in writing, but the word is that the commercial outlets won't carry any information that's critical of pharma in a segment that is bounded by a pharmaceutical ad. So I would like to say that my book has been, we're having a good talk here and we're talking the truth. This conversation is not allowed on the mainstream media. And if people want to understand what's going on with our healthcare, in the 480,000 excess deaths of Americans each year because of the inferiority of our health and healthcare, and wasting $1.9 trillion per year on healthcare above the other country's spending. If you want to find out about that, you got to read the book, because you are not going to hear about it in mainstream media.
That's so interesting. It's definitely worth a read. It's eye-opening. I'm going to send it to my dad, who's a retired internist. And I'm going to send him this.
I hope it doesn't impair your relationship with your dad.
I mean, he's retired now. I'm going to send him this conversation as well. But how striking that there's even a possibility that our mainstream news would say with the pharmaceutical companies, okay, I've heard just out of the air, I could be completely wrong. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, guys, but 70+% of the advertising dollars for mainstream news outlets comes from pharmaceuticals. You guys have all seen the compilations of how profoundly sponsored these news media outlets are, the people that control the legacy media. Thankfully, there's other outlets now, which are also captured in some ways. We all know this. I was deleted from Instagram for questioning the mainstream narrative a year ago. Doing great now, though, coming back strong. So most of the legacy and new social media outlets are captured, and they will filter what's out there. But to think that if a pharmaceutical company sponsors a segment on the news for a drug, Humira, whatever, Chantix, they're not going to have anything critical of the pharmaceutical industry, and that's crazy. It's just it's clown world, and it's propaganda. It's 1984. But I also want to make sure that people understand that neither you nor I is so far gone with pharmaceuticals that we can't acknowledge that there are benefits. I mean, when I was in residency and then working at the VA, Harvoni for hepatitis C was a freaking miracle drug. I mean, people would die of hepatitis C, and the VA population has a large percentage that have hepatitis C from IV drug use or other, methods of contraction. And we didn't have drugs. And now we have antivirals like Harvoni that actually can cure hepatitis C. So
the problem is Harvoni is a great drug, and Sovaldi they're great drugs for hepatitis C. But the drug company didn't have to be so damn greedy. They bought this technology from a smaller company. They doubled the price. In 1 year, they made back their entire purchase price of the company that made the drug. And all the rest, pulling money out of VA, pulling money out of Medicaid, they didn't have to do that. And we don't have to allow them to do that. If enough people understand this and get in touch with their elected officials and tell their friends, we don't have to put up with this. They're just stealing from us.
It does feel like we are being hoodwinked. You have a statistic in the book that 1 out of 8 drugs that's developed by the pharmaceutical company has a new or significantly improved effect. And I thought that was striking.
Let me change that a little bit because
Okay.
I learned a little bit more about that. Because there's a lot of Me Too drugs in the 1 out of 8 drugs that's approved. But if you look at the new drugs, the new molecular entities that are approved by the regulatory authorities, 1 out of 4 truly new drugs provides substantial benefit over existing studies.
Okay.
1 out of 4. Take a guess what the median price of a new drug is in 2022.
To the consumer, like without insurance?
Retail price, yeah.
Per month?
Per year.
Per year?
There's a lot of pressure here, I know.
$3,000.
$250,000.
What?
$250,000.
So we're talking
from 180 last year. It was 3,000 in 2008, and now it's $250,000.
So over $20,000 a month retail price for new drugs. How is somebody without insurance?
One out of 4 of which will be a significant benefit over previous drugs.
How is someone without insurance supposed to afford that?
They're not.
They're not going to afford
it. But wait a minute. The problem is not how can someone without insurance afford it. That's not the drug company. That's not the way they look at it. They look at it as how can we price this thing to extract as much money from Americans as we can. And the people who can't afford it, be damned. We're going to price it that way so that the insured folks and the people on public insurance, Medicare or Medicaid, so we can extract as much money as possible. And that right there is the problem, that the drug company doesn't care about the effect of the availability, the economic availability of their drugs. They don't care about that. Their game is to maximize their profits.
I believe in open markets, but I'm not sure that pharmaceuticals should be a part of this. They're sort of just playing on open markets and saying, hey, we have this drug. It's a unique drug. We're going to price it however we want. They're using economics and supply and demand and saying people are going to pay this. It doesn't seem to me off the bat right now that this should be the same as a widget that you make that is driven by consumer demand. It shouldn't be selling pizza as, oh, this is the best pizza. If people will pay $35 for my pizza, then I can sell it. But it seems like a different thing, right? These are pharmaceuticals.
Well, there could be a hybrid. I'm not against open markets. I'm not rabidly for open markets, but I got into a debate at Harvard Medical School. A conservative think tank hired the dean of Harvard Medical School to moderate a debate. And it was 2 of their folks who are pro-business folks, and me and another, a professor, Jerry Avorn, who's a really excellent pharmaceutical researcher on the other side. And the question was exactly the question you posed, is should we have free markets? And what is very clear is whoever supports markets ought to be fighting like hell to get this market straightened out so that the market is fair, so people get what they pay for, so that they know that the data is transparent and they're not buying things blind. This is not a free market.
True.
And the free market may be the best way to distribute pharmaceuticals. I'm not arguing that we need to get rid of the free market. I'm arguing that we need the information available so that doctors and the public and the policymakers know what they're paying for.
So what's the way forward? I think it's certainly changing the way that doctors are educated. What about for consumers, and how do you think we move forward with this? A lot of
people, we've got to have people understand this. This is so complex. I think one of the reasons why the drug industry has gotten away with taking this so far out of whack is that it's just too damn complex. I mean, I've been doing this, 7 days a week for 20 years. That's how I know what's going on. And you pretty much need to do it to keep up with them. They're very smart and they keep moving forward. So the first step is education. People have to understand this. It's people, I'm the geek. I stay in my study and I, write something occasionally. You're the podcaster, and the legacy media isn't going to help us here. So if there's going to be progress, it's going to have to be through the non-legacy media carrying the real story that I'm not even really, it's very impolite for me to carry on this conversation at Harvard Medical School. People don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear it. They're just so enfranchised in the system. You know, they're the winners and the leaders of the system. They don't want to hear about this critical thinking. And
you're a professor there, right? I mean, you were humble in your introduction.
I'm a lecturer. We got to be careful.
You were a lecturer at Harvard.
Yes.
Could you call yourself faculty at Harvard?
Yes, I'm faculty at Harvard.
So it's one thing if me, Paul Saladino, carnivore MD, tries to go to Harvard, which is a goal of mine. We'll get to Harvard and we'll do some. I'll get some debates there. But you're a lecturer at Harvard. You're already in the door, man, and you can't even have this conversation.
People don't want to hear it. I mean, we're trying. I'm trying.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
As we speak, I'm trying, and I've sort of been there for 25 years, understanding what's going on with the pharmaceutical industry more and more. But I understood in the beginning. And I've got to be very targeted when I tell students about one of the 300 facts that we've talked about in the last hour. I have to be very careful to choose my fact well, or they're going to be alienated, and the rest of the faculty will say he's not so good. He's got an attitude.
Okay. One of the things that I think about a lot now, as we wrap the podcast up, is how to change medical education. And so maybe you and I can talk more offline in the future about how to do that, because I recently went back to the medical school that I went to, the University of Arizona, and I talked to medical students, and it's the same. They're not being told about nutrition. They're not being told about lifestyle stuff. They're being told mostly about drugs. And the worst part, John, as you say, is they think they're learning medicine. They think they're learning how to treat cardiovascular disease, dementia, diabetes. But what they're really learning is what drugs are best for those diseases. They're not actually learning how to treat those diseases. You put it so well. And so I hope that this podcast, I mean, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your time. My hope is that this podcast is a little bit of an effort in that direction, that we push the boulder a little bit further up the hill, and that, a few, 50, 100,000 people hear this and then talk to their friends, and that we're moving it in the right direction. And so thank you for your work. And I think that we keep doing this because we believe in it deeply.
Right. And thanks for the opportunity to discuss, to create a truth space with this. And let me say to your listeners, for the medical students and the healthcare professionals out there, if you're interested in this stuff, get in touch with me. I'm happy to hear from you. And I'm happy. There's a guy, I think today is giving 3 days from now, as an ordinary doc, he's not a drug critic. He hasn't been studying this. He hasn't done a fellowship. Got in touch with me and said, I want to do a grand rounds at my hospital. Will you send me some slides? And I said, great. And we've gone back and forth. He's got a lot of questions because it's scary to get up there as a non-expert amongst with an audience of believers in the straight pharma story. But he's going to do it in 3 days. And I would say that I will help anyone who wants to take this forward.
That's an incredibly generous offer. How can people get in touch with you? Where can they find more of your work? I imagine Sickening and Overdose America are on Amazon.
Yep. The best, maybe you could post the Harvard Medical School email, John_Abramson at hms.harvard.edu.
If that's the best one. Yeah.
Yeah. Write to me through that and I'll write back to you.
Yeah. I mean, that was how this conversation came about, was that I emailed you, not expecting a reply, got an email, and here we are. And so thank you for your time. It was a really fascinating conversation. I enjoyed reading Sickening, and it's opened my eyes. And I think that I really strongly believe this is very important work, and it will help a lot of people. So thanks for the work you do, John. And I hope our paths cross soon and we can eat a steak together.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks to you for carrying the message.